Eleanor, my mother-in-law, moved with a practiced, almost theatrical grace near the drinks cabinet. But I saw it. A quick, furtive glance in my direction before she poured something from a small, unlabeled vial into a glass intended for me. She clearly thought I wasn't looking, busy as I was pretending to listen to Arthur drone on. A special digestive Adrian, just for my favorite son-in-law, she announced, turning towards me. Her smile was wide, perfectly painted, but didn't quite reach her calculating eyes. "Thank you, Eleanor," I replied, forcing the words out through a suddenly tight throat. My gaze flickered towards her husband, Arthur, a man who consistently disparaged my career choices with thinly veiled contempt. With a surge of adrenaline masking the unease churning in my gut, I accepted the glass from her. Then, in a move I prayed looked casual, I discreetly switched my glass with the one near Arthur's elbow as I passed his chair. Less than an hour later, the carefully constructed facade of the evening began to crumble. 45 minutes passed, each one ticking by with agonizing slowness. My name is Adrian Foster. I'm 32 years old, an independent photojournalist based out of Denver, Colorado. It's a life I carved out for myself, built from scratch, chasing stories instead of stock options. My work takes me to conflict zones, documents human struggles, and sometimes appears in prestigious publications like Global Focus magazine. It's demanding, occasionally dangerous, but it pays the bills if you have the grit and the eye for it. And I do. I'm good at what I do. But for my in-laws, especially Eleanor, my chosen pet, the life I provide for their daughter has never measured up. "How's the little picture taking venture going, Adrian?" Arthur would inquire during those tense family dinners. His tone always dripped with a condescending amusement he didn't bother to conceal. He was a retired executive from a major investment bank, now a consultant for Sterling Advisory Group, a man who defined worth by portfolio size and the square footage of one's home. Every Sunday dinner at their opulent, suffocating house followed the same script. Eleanor would lavish attention on Clara, her daughter, fussing over her endlessly. Meanwhile, Arthur would subject me to a polite but firm interrogation about my recent assignments, my income stability, my future prospects. My wife Clara would often reach for my hand beneath the heavy linen tablecloth. Her gentle squeeze was a silent apology, a shared understanding of the pressure cooker environment her parents created. I just returned from a challenging assignment deep in the Rockies. Weeks spent tracking elusive wildlife for Wilderness Today, battling freezing temperatures and difficult terrain. The kind of work that felt real, meaningful, miles away from Arthur's world of finance. I was utterly drained, physically and mentally exhausted. But Clara had insisted. We couldn't possibly skip her mother's birthday dinner. "Just for a couple of hours, Adrian, please?" she'd pleaded, her eyes reflecting the familiar conflict of loyalty. I should have trusted the cold, knot of dread tightening in my stomach earlier that evening. It formed the moment Eleanor cornered me near the kitchen, her eyes darting nervously around the room before she pressed that specific glass into my hand. A slight, almost imperceptible tremor in her fingers as she delivered the line. "I made it special, just for you." Something felt profoundly wrong. A current of unease prickled beneath my skin. I just hadn't grasped the full extent of how wrong things were about to become. Clara and I met 6 years ago. It was at a gallery opening showcasing some of my earlier documentary work. She was finishing her master's degree then, already passionate about her future work with an environmental NPO. I was just beginning to gain recognition in the demanding field of photojournalism. The connection between us was immediate, undeniable. She understood the drive that pushed me to capture the world, its beauty and its harsh realities, through my lens. I admired her fierce dedication to protecting the very planet I documented. Her parents, however, were an entirely different story. From our very first introduction, Arthur made his disapproval clear. He'd expected someone different for Clara. Someone with a corner office, a predictable career path, a hefty retirement plan, a company car. Someone essentially who mirrored his own life and values. Eleanor's approach was more insidious, veiled in superficial politeness. She'd offer faint praise for my published photos, always followed by a pointed question about when I planned to settle down into something more stable and secure. She'd invite me to family functions, only to introduce me to her influential friends as Clara's husband, the photojournalist, her tone subtly emphasizing the photojournalist part, as if it were a curious but ultimately inadequate profession. For years, I swallowed my pride and tried to win their approval, or at least their tolerance. I brought expensive wines to their dinners, dutifully presented copies of magazines featuring my work, casually mentioned assignments for high-profile international clients. It made no difference. In their eyes, I remained a transient figure in their daughter's life. A phase, perhaps an exciting one, but ultimately a phase Clara would surely outgrow and replace with someone more suitable. Last Christmas, the charade slipped. I overheard Eleanor on the phone in the hallway, her voice lowered but carrying clearly in the quiet house. Clara could have married D'Arhez, you know, she confided to someone. Cardiovascular surgeon, excellent family, impeccable background. But she chose. A pause, heavy with unspoken judgment. The creative one. The way she hesitated, the faint distaste coloring the word creative, made it sound like an unfortunate affliction rather than a profession. Arthur was typically more direct, less concerned with subtlety. When Clara and I excitedly announced we were trying for a baby, hoping it might bridge the gap, he pulled me aside later that evening. His expression was serious, paternalistic. "Children are expensive, son," he stated, his gaze unwavering. "Perhaps you should think about securing real, substantial employment before bringing one into the world." I never repeated these conversations, these countless small cuts, to Clara. She loved her parents, saw the good in them despite their glaring flaws, and I couldn't bear to force her into the impossible position of choosing sides. It felt like a betrayal of her love for them and ours for each other. So, I perfected the art of the polite smile. I endured Arthur's firm, assessing handshakes at every visit. I complimented Eleanor's elaborate, often catered cooking. And I buried my resentment, my frustration, deep inside, keeping my true thoughts locked away. But the signs were always there, flickering warnings I chose to ignore. The way Eleanor would invariably pull Clara away to help in the kitchen whenever I started discussing a particularly successful or dangerous assignment. The uncanny frequency with which I'd be accidentally cropped out of family photos she later shared. The time Arthur, while looking directly at me, suggested Clara might benefit from therapy to address her impulsive life decisions, the primary one, unspoken but clearly implied, being her choice to marry me. I dismissed it all, brushed it aside, told myself that time, patience, and continued professional success would eventually earn their acceptance, if not their respect. I was profoundly wrong. On the Friday of Eleanor's birthday dinner, I flew back into Denver International. My cheeks were raw from the windburn acquired high in the Rockies, but my memory cards held images powerful enough to secure our mortgage payments for the next 3 months. Images captured for global focuses. I was bone-weary, the kind of tired that settles deep in your joints, but I showered, changed into a respectable button-down shirt, and drove us across town to Eleanor and Arthur's imposing colonial-style home in the city's most expensive neighborhood. The dinner began with the usual strained civility. Classical music played softly in the background, a counterpoint to the tension simmering beneath the surface. Arthur held forth, boasting about a lucrative deal recently closed by his consulting firm, Sterling Advisory Group. Eleanor fussed over the elaborate table settings, ensuring every crystal glass and polished silver fork was perfectly aligned. Clara's brother, Marcus, and his wife, Sophia, navigated the conversational minefield with practiced politeness, sticking to safe topics. I nursed a single beer, the condensation cold against my hand, and mentally counted the minutes until we could make a graceful exit. After the main course, heavy and rich, Eleanor announced with forced cheerfulness that she'd prepared a special digestive to accompany dessert. She swept out of the dining room towards the kitchen. Feeling restless, needing a reason to move, I stood. "Need a hand carrying those, Eleanor?" I offered, following her. That's when I saw it. The brief tableau that sent ice water through my veins. As I pushed open the kitchen door, she stood with her back partially turned. Two small liqueur glasses sat separate from the others on the gleaming granite countertop. In her hand was a small, dark glass vial. She quickly, almost furtively, tipped a few drops of its clear, colorless contents into one of the glasses. It wasn't a garnish, not a flavoring liqueur. It was something else entirely, something odorless. The instant she heard my footsteps on the polished floor, she startled, tucking the vial swiftly into the pocket of her silk hostess gown. "Oh, Adrian," she exclaimed, her voice a shade too high, too bright. "No need, dear. I've got this handled." She turned, picking up the two glasses. "This one's for you," she said, extending the doctored glass towards me. "A special recipe, just for my favorite son-in-law." Her smile was fixed, unwavering. My throat constricted. I looked down at the glass she offered. Was it my imagination, or was there a faint, almost imperceptible oily film shimmering on the surface of the amber liquid, catching the overhead light? "Happy to help carry these out," I said, my voice remarkably steady. I deliberately took both glasses from her outstretched hands before she could react. Back in the dining room, the conversation had lulled. Arthur was absorbed in his smartphone, scrolling through emails or stock tickers, barely glancing up as I approached his side of the massive mahogany table. "Your digestive, Arthur," I said, placing the tampered glass, the one Eleanor had prepared specially for me, directly in front of him. I set the other, presumably untainted, glass down at my own place setting. Then I watched, my heart pounding against my ribs, as he picked it up without a second thought and took a sip. I murmured an excuse about preferring water with my dessert, needing to stay sharp for an early start tomorrow. 45 agonizing minutes later, Arthur's face grew pale. A sheen of sweat broke out on his flushed forehead. He abruptly pushed his chair back, mumbling something about feeling unwell, and rushed from the room, heading towards the downstairs guest bathroom. The violent, unmistakable sounds of his subsequent illness echoed unnervingly through the otherwise silent, formal house. Across the table, every trace of color drained from Eleanor's face. Her carefully constructed composure shattered in an instant. Her eyes, wide with dawning horror and realization, flew to meet mine. In that silent, charged moment, suspended between the sounds of Arthur's retching and the stunned silence of the others, I knew two things with absolute, chilling certainty. My mother-in-law, Eleanor, had intentionally tried to drug me, and she knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that I knew precisely what she had done. I didn't flinch, didn't utter a word of accusation, didn't give her the satisfaction of a reaction. I simply picked up my fork and took a deliberate bite of the rich chocolate cake placed before me, while Clara, alarmed, hurried after her father. In the ensuing chaos, Arthur weakly insisting must have been something he ate earlier, perhaps bad shellfish, Eleanor stammering in agreement, fluttering uselessly, I calmly palmed the untouched digestive glass meant for me. Later, amidst the confusion of their early departure, I slipped it carefully into my jacket pocket. Something profound, something irreversible had shifted deep within me. The anger I felt wasn't the hot, explosive kind. It was cold, calculating, a deliberate, icy resolve hardening in my chest. I wasn't going to simply let this pass. This act of aggression, this violation, demanded a response. But I wouldn't fight them on their terms with hysterics or accusations they could easily dismiss. No, I was going to make them confront the reality of who they truly were, using the very tools I possessed: observation, evidence, and quiet precision. The following Monday, bypassing any uncertainty, I took the glass, carefully bagged and labeled, to Dr. Alistair Finch. He ran Finch Forensics Laboratory downtown, a former contact from a complex investigative piece I'd worked on years ago. A man known for his discretion and expertise. Is this a personal matter, Adrian, or professional? Dr. Finch asked, his gaze sharp and analytical as I explained vaguely that I needed the contents analyzed for any unusual substances. It's a family matter, Dr. Finch, I replied, keeping my tone even. A delicate one. 3 excruciatingly long days later, my phone rang. It was him. Adrian? His voice was serious, professional. There were significant traces of alprazolam in that digestive sample. Alprazolam, the generic name for Xanax. Nothing inherently lethal in that concentration, he continued, but certainly enough to incapacitate someone for several hours, possibly induce confusion, drowsiness, even some temporary memory loss. A heavy pause hung in the air. Where exactly did you acquire this sample, Adrian? Thank you, Dr. Finch. I appreciate your promptness and discretion, I said, deliberately sidestepping his question. Could you please provide a formal, written report detailing your findings? I didn't offer any further explanation. He didn't press. That evening, I approached Clara. I told her I needed to skip the upcoming Sunday dinners for a while. I need to dedicate all my focus to preparing for this upcoming exhibition. I lied, hating the deception, but knowing the truth was too explosive, too damaging. Right now, the global focus deadline is looming too. She looked disappointed, her brow furrowing slightly. Okay, Adrian, if you need the time. I understand, she conceded, though a flicker of hurt crossed her face. I didn't tell her about the lab report. Not yet. Telling her would detonate a bomb in the middle of her life, forcing choices she wasn't ready to make. I needed more than just a lab result. I needed context. I needed proof of intent, perhaps even a pattern. Over the next 2 weeks, I channeled my cold anger into methodical investigation. I hired a private investigator, a discreet professional I'd used for background checks on assignment fixers in the past. The results were illuminating and disturbing. Eleanor didn't just have one prescription for alprazolam. She had active prescriptions from 3 different psychiatrists across Denver. She'd been doctor shopping, accumulating doses far exceeding any reasonable therapeutic need for years. The investigator also uncovered whispers, carefully suppressed rumors circulating within Eleanor and Arthur's privileged social circle. Stories of erratic behavior at a neighbor's fundraiser last spring. Quiet accusations of pilfered jewelry at the Willow Creek Club, hastily smoothed over by Arthur. A pattern of behavior her family, primarily Arthur and his resources, had consistently worked to conceal and bury. I compiled everything. The lab report, the prescription records, the investigator's notes on the rumors, into a secure digital file and a physical copy. Then I waited, letting the pieces settle, searching for the right moment, the right leverage. It came unexpectedly, about a week later. Clara mentioned, almost casually over dinner, that her mother needed some professional headshots taken for a new charity board profile she was joining. And Mom specifically asked if you would be willing to take them, Adrian, Clara added, a note of genuine surprise in her voice. She even offered to pay your full day rate. My pulse quickened. This was it. The opening I needed. Of course, I agreed, keeping my expression neutral. Tell her I'd be happy to. The following Saturday afternoon, I arrived at their imposing Denver home alone. My professional camera bag was slung over one shoulder. In my other hand, I carried a plain, sealed manila envelope. Eleanor was waiting in the meticulously decorated living room. She was dressed in expensive beige cashmere, her makeup flawless, her smile perfectly hospitable. Arthur had an unexpected meeting at the office, she explained smoothly, gesturing towards the sitting area. Just the 2 of us today. Before we start setting up the lights, Eleanor, I began, my voice quiet but firm, cutting through the forced pleasantries. I thought you might want to review this first. I held out the manila envelope. Inside lay Dr. Finch's official toxicology report. stapled neatly to printouts documenting her multiple alprazolam prescriptions from the different doctors. Her carefully manicured hands trembled slightly as she slid the papers out and began to read. The color drained from her face, leaving her makeup standing out in stark relief. This is preposterous," she finally whispered, her voice thin and reedy. "Utterly absurd. I would never." "We both know exactly what happened that night, Eleanor," I interrupted, my voice remaining level, devoid of overt anger. "What I haven't understood until now is why. Why take such a risk?" Her face hardened instantly, the mask of shocked innocence replaced by a familiar, cold hauteur. "You are not good enough for my daughter, Adrian," she stated, her voice laced with years of repressed disdain. "You never have been. You never will be." She straightened her shoulders, defiance flashing in her eyes. "A real man provides security, stability, a future. Not just pictures from dangerous places. And drugging your daughter's husband provides that security?" I countered, keeping my tone deliberately calm, refusing to be drawn into an emotional confrontation. "Is that your definition of protecting Clara's future?" "It wasn't meant to seriously harm you," she snapped, her composure finally cracking. "Just make you unwell, disoriented, perhaps make you miss that ridiculous gallery opening you've been endlessly talking about for months." Her eyes glittered with malice. "To show Clara, finally, how unreliable you truly are. How unfit." I let her ugly words hang in the air, the sheer calculated cruelty of her admission settling between us. I let the silence stretch, watching the play of emotions, anger, fear, justification, flicker across her face. "Here's what's going to happen next, Eleanor," I said at last, my voice low and deliberate. "First, you are going to tell Arthur exactly what you did. Confess the whole thing to him. Then," I continued, meeting her gaze steadily, "you are both going to start treating me and my marriage to your daughter with respect. Not because you've had some sudden change of heart, because I know that's impossible for you, but because—" I paused for effect. "Because the only alternative is Clara finding out precisely what kind of parents she has. Finding out about the alprazolam, the prescriptions, the lies, everything." Eleanor choked out a laugh, sharp and brittle, utterly devoid of humor. "She'll never believe you over us. We're her family." I picked up my heavy camera bag, signaling the end of our conversation. "Maybe not, based on my word alone," I conceded calmly. "But she will believe the official report from Finch Forensics. She'll believe the documented prescription records from 3 different psychiatrists. She'll likely believe the whispers from the neighbors you've alienated at the Willow Creek Club." I paused at the door, turning back to face her. "Are you truly willing to gamble your entire relationship with your only daughter on that assumption, Eleanor?" I left without taking a single photograph. Just as I predicted, that very evening, Eleanor called Clara, sobbing hysterically. She claimed I had behaved outrageously, inappropriately during our scheduled photo session. She painted a picture of me being hostile, accusatory, even threatening. When Clara confronted me later that night, her face etched with confusion and worry, I knew I couldn't shield her from the ugly truth any longer. The time for protecting her from her parents' toxicity was over. With a heavy heart, I laid everything out on our kitchen table. Dr. Finch's stark lab report, the copies of Eleanor's multiple alprazolam prescriptions, even printouts of increasingly hostile text messages Eleanor had sent me over the past few years. Messages I had saved, sensing they might one day be necessary. Mom wouldn't do this, Adrian," Clara kept repeating, shaking her head. But her voice lacked its usual conviction. Doubt flickered in her tear-filled eyes as she stared at the undeniable evidence before her. The next day, she went to confront her parents alone. I offered to go with her, but she needed to do it herself. I wasn't there for the confrontation, didn't hear the denials or accusations hurled in her direction. But when she returned to our apartment hours later, her eyes were swollen and red from crying, her shoulders slumped in exhaustion and pain. "Dad says it's all a terrible misunderstanding," she reported quietly, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. He says, you're trying to drive a wedge between us, between me and them, because you feel insecure about your career compared to theirs. I simply nodded, a wave of weary resignation washing over me. I had anticipated this exact defense, this predictable attempt to twist the narrative and paint me as the villain. It was their standard operating procedure. "And what do you think, Clara?" I asked gently, needing to know where she stood, needing to know if their poison had worked. She didn't answer immediately. She just walked past me into the bedroom, crawled under the covers, and turned her face away, leaving my question hanging unanswered in the tense silence of the room. I felt a cold dread seep into my bones. I had pushed back against their attack, but somehow, in doing so, I seemed to have stumbled deeper into their manipulative trap. Now, in Clara's eyes, clouded by her parents' lies and emotional blackmail, I was potentially the aggressor, the source of the conflict. They had succeeded in planting seeds of doubt in the mind of the one person whose trust and belief meant everything to me. For 2 agonizing weeks, a chasm opened between Clara and me. She barely spoke, moving through our apartment like a ghost. She continued to visit her parents' house alone, returning each time with fresh redness around her eyes and a deeper furrow of doubt etched onto her brow. Their manipulation was relentless, insidious. Feeling helpless, I threw myself into my work, retreating to the long hours and demanding focus required in my studio, editing photos from the Rockies, planning the Global Focus feature, waiting for the storm to break, one way or another. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, a small padded envelope arrived for me by a courier. No return address. Just my name, Adrian Foster, scrawled across the front in an elegant, unfamiliar cursive handwriting. Inside, nestled in bubble wrap, was a single USB flash drive and a small, folded note. The note contained only 4 words. "You should see this. S. Sophia, Marcus's wife, my sister-in-law." My hands trembled slightly as I plugged the drive into my laptop. It contained several video files, clearly time-stamped security footage from inside Arthur and Eleanor's house. The first file showed the night of the infamous birthday dinner. There was Eleanor in the kitchen, plain as day, furtively adding the drops from the vial into the digestive glass. There was the moment I entered the kitchen unexpectedly. There was the exchange, my taking both glasses. There was the crucial moment in the dining room, me placing the tampered glass in front of Arthur, him drinking it without suspicion. But there was more. Footage captured later that night after Clara and I had left. Eleanor, her face contorted in fury, screaming at Arthur, blaming him for drinking from the wrong glass, her voice rising hysterically. Arthur, pale and clearly still unwell, yelling back, his voice sharp with anger. "This isn't the first damn time you've pulled something like this, Eleanor. When will you learn?" I replayed that segment 3 times, the implications hitting me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just confirmation of Eleanor's deliberate act against me. It was evidence of a pattern of behavior. And crucially, it was proof that Arthur knew. He knew about her actions, maybe not always the specifics, but he knew about her propensity for this kind of malicious interference. The next file was dated just 2 days after the dinner incident. It showed Eleanor and Arthur in their opulent living room, engaged in a heated argument specifically about me. "He knows what you did, Eleanor," Arthur stated grimly, pacing the floor. "He's not stupid." "So what if he does?" Eleanor retorted dismissively, perched on the edge of an antique armchair. "It's his word against mine, against ours." Her chin lifted defiantly. "Clara will never choose that. That photographer over her family. She knows where her loyalty lies. And if she does?" Arthur counted, stopping his pacing to face her. "If this time he convinces her, then she is not the daughter I raised," Eleanor replied, her voice turning chillingly cold, devoid of any warmth. "Don't you worry, Arthur," she continued, a calculating look entering her eyes. "I've already started talking to her about their supposed marriage problems, planting seeds of doubt about his commitment. his stability, highlighting his dangerous job. A small, tight smile touched her lips. By the time I'm finished, she'll be considering divorce, and she'll think it was entirely her own idea. I slammed my laptop shut, my hands shaking uncontrollably. A wave of nausea washed over me. This wasn't just about their disapproval of me or my career. This was a calculated, systematic campaign to dismantle my marriage, to control Clara's life completely, isolating her from anyone who didn't fit their narrow, materialistic vision of her future. And they had been doing it, piece by piece, for years. My next call was immediate, dialing Sophia's number, my mind racing. "Sophia, it's Adrian. I got the package. Why? Why send this to me now?" "Because they did the same thing to me, Adrian," she said quietly, her voice low and strained. "Years ago, when Marcus and I first got married." Her words hung heavy in the silence. "They tried everything to break us up for almost 2 years. Said I wasn't from the right background, that my family wasn't prominent enough, that my career as an interior coordinator wasn't suitable." Her voice trembled slightly. "It almost worked. They nearly destroyed us. Why didn't you ever tell us? Tell Clara or me?" I asked, bewildered. "Marcus doesn't know the full extent of it," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. He worships his father, you know? Believes everything Arthur tells him. I tried to explain years ago, but he just thought I was being paranoid, overly sensitive." A sigh traveled down the line. I couldn't stand by and watch them do it all over again to you and Clara." The very next day, a text message pinged on my phone. It was from Arthur. "Adrian, we should talk. Man to man. No wives present." My jaw tightened. Man to man. Of course. I agreed to meet him at the Willow Creek Club, their preferred neutral ground, a place reeking of old money and exclusivity. He was waiting for me in a private, wood-paneled room, a heavy crystal tumbler of bourbon swirling in his hand. The picture of relaxed, confident power. "Adrian," he began, gesturing for me to sit, his tone smooth and conciliatory. "Sit down. Have a drink." I remained standing. "Families can be complicated entities," he continued, taking a slow sip of his bourbon. "My wife, Eleanor, she can be difficult at times. Overprotective of Clara, certainly. But you must understand, her heart is fundamentally in the right place. She means well." "Drugging someone is meaning well, Arthur?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. He waved a dismissive hand, attempting to brush off the accusation as trivial. "A regrettable misunderstanding, Adrian. Nothing more." He leaned forward slightly, adopting a confidential tone. "Eleanor takes medication, you see, for anxiety. Has for years. She probably just mixed up the glasses in the kitchen. An honest mistake." "I have the security footage from your house, Arthur," I stated flatly, cutting through his carefully crafted narrative. Time-stamped footage from the night of the dinner, and footage from 2 days later. The change in Arthur's demeanor was instantaneous. The mask of affable concern dissolved, replaced by a cold, hard, calculating expression. His eyes narrowed. The folksy charm vanished. "What is it you want, Adrian?" he asked bluntly, his voice now sharp, businesslike. "Money? Is that what this is about? Financial compensation?" A humorless smirk touched his lips. "I always suspected you married Clara for reasons beyond affection. Her family's resources must seem tempting to someone in your precarious profession. I want you and Eleanor to leave us alone," I said simply, holding his gaze. "Completely alone. Stop whispering doubts into Clara's ear. Stop trying to convince her I'm not good enough, that our life isn't stable enough. Stop interfering in our marriage. Period." Arthur leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished table, his eyes like chips of ice. "You honestly think this is the first time we've had to deal with someone like you? Someone trying to take advantage of our family name, our position?" He let out a short, harsh laugh. "Mark my words, Adrian. Clara will come home eventually, back to where she belongs. She always does. He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. Go ahead. Ask her about Dor Evan Hayes. Ask her about the fiancé she had before you came along. A chill colder than the Rocky Mountain wind snaked down my spine. What the hell are you talking about? Arthur smiled, a slow, predatory curve of his lips. Oh yes, Clara was engaged before she met you. Very promising young man. Dr. Hayes, cardiovascular surgeon. He swirled his bourbon again. Impressive career. But, well, we didn't approve of his background. Not quite the right fit for our family. He shrugged nonchalantly. Took us about 6 months, maybe a little more of careful persuasion. Convincing Clara he wasn't right for her, that he was seeing someone else. Perhaps. He chuckled softly. She broke it off, naturally. Came home crying to Daddy, devastated. He leaned back in his chair, locking eyes with me. History has a way of repeating itself, son. The drive back to my Denver apartment was a blur of cold fury and dawning, sickening understanding. Pulling over to the side of the road, I found the number for Chloe, Clara's college roommate, the one who knew her before I did. My hands were unsteady as I dialed. Chloe? It's Adrian Foster, Clara's husband. Adrian. Hi. Is everything okay? Chloe, I need to ask you about someone from Clara's past. Someone named Dor Evan Hayes. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Oh God, Adrian. Evan. That whole situation was just awful. Truly awful. Her voice dropped, filled with sympathy. He seemed perfect for her. Genuinely perfect. Smart, kind, successful. They were so happy. But her parents, especially her mother. Chloe hesitated. They somehow convinced Clara he was cheating on her. Utterly fabricated story. They even managed to plant some kind of evidence. Fake emails or something, I think. She sighed. Evan tried desperately to tell Clara the truth, to show her it was all lies orchestrated by her parents. But by then, Eleanor had poisoned her mind so thoroughly, Clara didn't trust him anymore. She wouldn't even listen. The pattern clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't just about me, my career, or Eleanor's misguided attempt to protect her daughter. This was about absolute control. Complete, ruthless control over Clara's life, her choices, her relationships. And they had done it before, successfully. They had broken her previous engagement, manipulating her emotions, isolating her from someone they deemed unsuitable. I didn't confront Clara immediately upon returning home. Seeing her withdrawn state, the seeds of doubt already sown, I knew a direct accusation fueled only by Chloe's story and Arthur's smug revelation wouldn't be enough. They would deny it, twist it, and further alienate Clara from me. Instead, I began to meticulously gather every piece of corroborating evidence I could find. It felt like preparing for one of my most challenging investigative assignments. I reached out to Dor Evan Hayes directly. He was understandably reluctant to speak with me at first, the old wounds clearly still sensitive. But when I carefully explained the current situation, the parallels, the pattern I was uncovering, he agreed to help. He forwarded me old, saved email chains between himself and Clara from that painful period 6 years ago. Emails that starkly illustrated how Eleanor and Arthur had systematically, insidiously undermined their relationship, planting doubts, twisting words, creating friction where none existed. I contacted other people from Clara's past, former colleagues, old friends who had mysteriously drifted away after expressing support for Clara's independence or questioning her parents' influence. A consistent, disturbing pattern emerged. Anyone who encouraged Clara to think for herself, to pursue paths not explicitly approved by Eleanor and Arthur, was gradually, subtly pushed out of her life. Sophia provided more damning security footage from her anonymous USB drive. Clips showing Eleanor and Arthur coolly discussing their long-term plans for Clara and me after the anticipated divorce. Once they divorce, we'll convince her to move back home for a while, Arthur stated calmly in one clip. swirling a brandy snifter. Get her head straight. She can take a more active role running the Sterling Foundation, meet suitable young men through our connections. My blood ran cold. They spoke of their daughter's life as if it were a corporate merger to be managed. I compiled everything. The lab reports, the prescription records, the investigator's notes, Dr. Hayes' emails, Chloe's testimony, the damning video files, onto a single, encrypted hard drive. A comprehensive dossier detailing years of manipulation and control. Then, I invited Marcus and Sophia over for dinner the following Saturday. I didn't tell Clara the true purpose of the evening, only that I thought it was important we connect with her brother and sister-in-law, present a united front. I knew I was about to detonate a bomb in the center of her world. I was about to destroy the carefully constructed image of her parents she had clung to for her entire life. But the truth, however painful, had to come out. Over dessert, after clearing the plates, I took a deep breath and connected my laptop to our large television screen. The mood in the room shifted instantly, a sense of unease settling over us. There's something important you all need to see, I said, my voice low but steady. Clara looked at me, confused. Marcus frowned slightly. Sophia watched me intently, her expression unreadable but knowing. For the next hour, the four of us sat in stunned silence, broken only by Clara's occasional gasp or choked sob as the evidence unspooled on the screen. The security footage of Eleanor drugging the drink. The subsequent argument revealing Arthur's complicity and their history of such actions. The cold-blooded discussion about manipulating Clara into divorce. Excerpts from Dr. Hayes' emails highlighting the fabricated infidelity accusations. Summaries of conversations with Chloe and other former friends. Clara sat motionless, her face utterly pale, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Marcus stared rigidly ahead, shaking his head slowly, muttering, "No, that's not my parents. That can't be them," under his breath, his denial crumbling before the irrefutable proof. Sophia reached out and gently placed a hand on her husband's arm, offering silent support. When the final video clip faded to black, the silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. Clara slowly turned to me, her eyes swimming in tears, filled with a mixture of horror, betrayal, and dawning understanding. "Adrian, why? Why didn't you tell me all of this sooner?" she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Because I needed you to see it for yourself, Clara," I replied gently but firmly. "All of it. Undeniably. Not just what they tried to do to me recently, but the pattern. What they've been doing to you, manipulating your life, your choices for years." Marcus abruptly stood up, his face flushed with anger and disbelief. "This is bullshit, Adrian. This has to be fake. You've edited these videos somehow. My parents, they wouldn't. They couldn't do things like this." Sophia tightened her grip on his arm, her voice quiet but firm. "Marcus, listen to me. They did it to us too, remember? When we first got married." She looked directly into her husband's eyes. "Why do you think they suddenly started approving of me, started being so welcoming, right after James was born? Think about it." Her words struck home. "Because a grandchild," she continued softly, "meant they finally had leverage over us. Over you." The color drained completely from Marcus's face as the terrible truth sank in. He stared at his wife, aghast. You never told me it was that bad." "I tried, Marcus," Sophia whispered, her eyes filled with old pain. "I tried to tell you how they made me feel, the things they said. But you wouldn't listen. You didn't want to believe it." Later that night, long after Marcus and Sophia had left in strained silence, Clara crawled into bed beside me. The space between us felt charged, different. I need some time, Adrian," she said softly, her voice thick with exhaustion. "Time to process all of this. It's a lot." She turned to face me, her eyes clear despite the lingering tears. "But I believe you, I see it now. And I am so sorry I ever doubted you." The relief that washed over me was immense, a physical weight lifting from my chest. The next morning, Eleanor called Clara's cell phone. Anticipating the conversation, Clara put the call on speakerphone, glancing at me with newfound resolve in her eyes. "Clara, darling, I was just thinking," Eleanor began, her voice unnaturally cheerful, dripping with false concern. "Perhaps you should come stay with us for a little while. Just for a week or two. Your father and I are so worried about the stress you must be under." She paused, letting the implication hang. "Marriage can be so difficult, darling, and sometimes a little separation, a little distance, can bring such clarity." "Mom," Clara interrupted, her voice quiet but firm, cutting through Eleanor's manipulative spiel. "I've seen the videos." A stunned silence crackled on the line. Then Eleanor's voice, sharp, guarded. "What videos? What are you talking about, Clara?" "The security footage, Mom," Clara stated clearly. "From your house. Of you putting something in Adrian's drink that night." Her voice gained strength. "Of you and Dad plotting, planning to break up my marriage." Another heavy pause. Then Eleanor's practiced denial kicked in. "Clara, sweetheart, whatever Adrian has shown you has clearly been manipulated, doctored somehow. You know how he feels about us, how jealous he's always been of our family, our closeness." "Stop, Mom," Clara said, her voice ringing with finality. "Just stop. We're coming over tonight. All of us. Marcus, Sophia, Adrian, and me. We are going to talk about this, finally, as a family." She took a deep breath. No more lies. No more secrets. After she disconnected the call, Clara turned to me, her expression a mixture of apprehension and determination. "They'll deny everything, Adrian," she predicted accurately. "They'll try to twist it all, turn it around on you, make you the villain again." I nodded grimly. "I know they will. It's the only way they know how to operate." "So," Clara asked, meeting my gaze directly, "what's our plan? How do we handle this?" For the first time in weeks, a genuine smile touched my lips. A smile of cold resolve. "I think," I said slowly, "it's finally time your parents met the real me. The Adrian Foster they've refused to see. Not just the photojournalist who documents things," I continued, picking up my camera bag, "but the one who knows exactly how to frame a narrative, how to tell a story with undeniable evidence." That evening, we arrived at Arthur and Eleanor's house together. I carried my professional camera equipment, including a tripod. Marcus and Sophia were already there, sitting stiffly, uncomfortably on the edge of the expensive living room sofa. The air crackled with tension. Arthur stood by the fireplace, attempting an air of confident control, though strained lines were visible around his eyes. Eleanor hovered nearby, her face pale beneath her makeup. "Now," Arthur began, clearing his throat, adopting his most reasonable tone. "I understand there's been some sort of misunderstanding, some misinterpretation of events." "There's no misunderstanding, Arthur," I interrupted coolly, already setting up my camera on the tripod, positioning it to capture the entire room. "And just so we're all perfectly clear, I'm documenting this conversation for the family archives." Eleanor objected immediately, her voice sharp with alarm. "Absolutely not. This is a private family matter, Adrian." "Exactly," I agreed smoothly, adjusting the lens. "Family business. And like it or not, Eleanor, I am family." I met her hostile gaze. "Even though you've both tried exceedingly hard for a very long time to change that fact." For the next 2 grueling hours, we laid bare years of manipulation and deceit. We presented the evidence methodically, piece by damning piece. The drug-drink incident, the chilling video footage of their plotting, the emails detailing the sabotage of Clara's engagement to D.R. Hayes, the accounts from other friends and colleagues they had alienated, the pattern of control that had suffocated Clara and Marcus their entire adult lives. Arthur and Eleanor denied everything naturally. Their initial reactions were blustering outrage, then wounded indignation. They called me unstable, paranoid, manipulative, a liar trying to tear their family apart out of professional jealousy. But with each denial, I calmly played another video clip, displayed another email, read another statement. The camera recorded their reactions, their faltering arguments, their growing desperation. Their faces grew progressively paler, their denials weaker, more frantic as the weight of the evidence became inescapable, undeniable even to Marcus, who sat watching his parents with dawning horror. Finally, Clara stood up, trembling slightly but resolute. She faced her parents, her voice thick with emotion but steady. "I love you both," she began, tears welling in her eyes. "You are my parents. But what you've done, what you've been doing for years, it's unforgivable." She took a deep, shaky breath. "You don't get to control my life anymore, or my husband's, or my marriage." Marcus rose slowly to stand beside his sister, placing a supportive hand on her shoulder. He looked directly at Arthur, his voice filled with newfound strength. "We're adults, Dad. Clara and I, we choose our own partners. We make our own decisions. We build our own paths." Eleanor dissolved into tears. Not tears of remorse, it seemed, but tears of frustration, of anger, stemming from the horrifying realization that she was losing control, that her carefully constructed world was collapsing around her. Arthur simply looked stunned, momentarily speechless, as if he genuinely couldn't comprehend his children finally, definitively defying him. As we prepared to leave the suffocating atmosphere of that house, I approached Arthur. I held out the encrypted hard drive containing copies of everything, all the footage, the emails, the reports, the testimonies. "This contains everything we discussed tonight," I said quietly. "It's yours to keep." Arthur eyed the drive suspiciously, warily. "What's that supposed to mean? Is this blackmail?" "It means," I replied, meeting his gaze evenly, "that I have no intention of ruining your reputation, your standing in the community, by sharing this information with anyone else. Doing so would inevitably hurt Clara, and I would never intentionally do that." I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. "But understand this, Arthur. If you or Eleanor ever try to interfere in our marriage again, if you ever try to manipulate Clara, whisper poison in her ear, or speak against me or my work," my voice dropped, low and clear. "Copies of everything on this drive will be discreetly delivered to every board member you sit with, every significant client of Sterling Advisory Group, every influential member of the Willow Creek Club, and your entire precious social circle." For the very first time since I had met the man years ago, Arthur looked at me not with condescension or dismissal, but with something grudgingly resembling respect. Or perhaps simply fear. "I underestimated you, Adrian," he conceded, his voice tight. "Yes," I said simply, holding his gaze for a final moment. "You did." 6 months passed. A fragile, tentative peace settled over the fractured family landscape. Clara and Marcus both started seeing therapists, individually and sometimes together, working through the complex emotional fallout of confronting their parents' decades of manipulation. Eleanor and Arthur kept their distance, as promised. Occasional, brief texts were exchanged, mostly surface-level pleasantries, but the previously suffocating calls and demands ceased. They respected the boundaries we had forcefully established. Then, as the holidays approached, a formal, engraved invitation arrived. Dinner at their house. The card simply read, "A fresh start." Clara hesitated, turning the thick card over in her hands. I think maybe we should consider going, Adrian," she said tentatively. "They're still my parents underneath it all, and maybe they're actually trying in their own way." I agreed, recognizing Clara's need to maintain some semblance of connection, however damaged. But I harbored no illusions. I wasn't naive enough to believe Eleanor and Arthur had undergone a fundamental transformation of character. Control was too deeply ingrained in their nature. When we arrived at the familiar, imposing house, everything on the surface appeared disconcertingly normal. Almost too normal. Eleanor had prepared an elaborate feast, filling the house with rich aromas. Arthur was playing the charming host, asking about my recent assignments for Global Focus with what seemed like genuine, even admiring interest. The conversation was polite, strained, carefully avoiding any mention of the confrontation 6 months prior. After dinner, as Clara helped Eleanor clear the table, Arthur beckoned me towards his study. "Adrian, join me for a scotch," he invited, his tone smooth, congenial. Inside the familiar, leather and mahogany-scented room, he poured 2 generous measures of expensive single malt. "I have a proposition for you, Adrian," he said, handing me a heavy crystal tumbler. "I've been doing some thinking about your career." He swirled his drink, avoiding my gaze for a moment. "Photojournalism, well, it's certainly been eventful for you. But have you ever considered diversifying? Leveraging your skills in a more stable, lucrative direction?" He finally met my eyes. "I could bring you into my firm, Sterling Advisory Group. Create a senior communications role, perhaps. Fast track to junior partner. The salary, naturally, would be substantial. More than enough to provide real security for Clara and the future." I took the heavy glass he offered, but made no move to drink from it. The amber liquid caught the lamplight. "Why would you do that, Arthur?" I asked quietly, skeptically. "Your family, Adrian," he replied smoothly, his expression earnest. "And frankly, I respect how you handled the unpleasantness earlier this year." He took a sip of his scotch. "You protected my daughter, stood your ground, but ultimately you kept things contained. Didn't burn everything down." He nodded slowly. "That's what a real man does. Protects his interests, understands discretion." I carefully set the untouched glass down on his polished desk. "I appreciate the offer, Arthur. Sincerely, but the answer is no." His smile tightened almost imperceptibly at the edges. "Adrian, be reasonable. Think about Clara. Think about the future. This is an olive branch. A tangible way for us to move forward. Put the past behind us." "No," I repeated firmly, meeting his gaze without flinching. "It's not an olive branch, Arthur. It's just another attempt at control. A different tactic, perhaps, but the same objective." I stood up, ready to leave the suffocating room. "You can't buy my loyalty, Arthur. You can't buy my silence with a job offer. And you fundamentally cannot stand the fact that Clara loves me for who I am, for the life we've built together, not for the salary I bring home." "Don't be an utter fool, Adrian," he hissed, the mask of cordiality finally dropping, revealing the familiar cold arrogance beneath. "Everyone has a price. Every single person." I paused at the doorway, looking back at him. "That's where you're profoundly wrong, Arthur," I said quietly. "And that's precisely why you will never truly understand your own daughter." I walked back into the dining room, leaving him standing alone in his study. Eleanor was showing Clara old photo albums, her voice bright and falsely nostalgic. "Oh, look at this one, darling," she was cooing, pointing at a picture. "You were always so happy, so carefree when you lived at home with us." Clara looked up as I entered, her eyes immediately searching mine. She could read the tension, the unspoken conflict in my expression. I gave her a slight, almost imperceptible nod. She closed the photo album gently but firmly and stood up. "Mom, Dad," Clara announced, her voice clear and carrying through the room, cutting through Eleanor's reminiscences. "Adrian and I have something we'd like to tell you both." Everyone turned to look at her, a sudden hush falling over the room. Arthur emerged from the study doorway, his face unreadable. Clara reached for my hand, her fingers linking tightly with mine. "We're having a baby," she said, her voice filled with quiet joy and unwavering strength. "Adrian and I'm 3 months pregnant." The shock on Eleanor and Arthur's faces was palpable, genuine this time. A complex mix of emotions flickered across their features: surprise, perhaps calculation, maybe even a hint of unexpected joy. Eleanor recovered first, rushing forward to embrace Clara, tears welling in her eyes. Whether genuine tears of happiness or tears for her lost control, I couldn't be sure. Arthur approached more slowly, his gaze shifting between Clara's radiant face and mine. He stopped in front of us, his expression stiff, guarded. "Well, he said, clearing his throat. Congratulations. Thank you, Arthur, I replied, meeting his gaze directly. Then, lowering my voice so only he could hear amidst Eleanor's effusive exclamations, I added, this child will grow up knowing love and support, not manipulation. This child will never, ever be a pawn in your games. I promise you that. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he gave a single stiff nod. He understood the message. The boundary was drawn. As we drove home later that night, the silence in the car was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. Clara reached over and squeezed my hand tightly. They'll never really change, will they? She asked softly, a note of sadness in her voice. No, I answered honestly, looking over at her profile illuminated by the passing streetlights. I don't think they're capable of it. But, I added, squeezing her hand back, they will have to accept that we have, that our life is ours to build on our own terms. 3 weeks later, a thick, certified letter arrived from Arthur's attorney. No personal note, no preamble. Inside was the deed to a charming house in a quiet Denver neighborhood, the very house Clara and I had been admiring and saving for, the one we had been renting month to month. Alongside the deed were legal documents establishing a substantial, irrevocable trust fund for our unborn child. No conditions attached. No strings. Just a clean transfer of assets. It wasn't an apology. Arthur wasn't capable of genuine remorse. But it was an acknowledgement, a concession. Perhaps the only way he knew how to signal that the game had changed, that a new power dynamic was in place. A tacit admission, perhaps, that we had won not by playing his game, but by refusing to. Our daughter, Lily, was born in the warmth of early summer. She was perfect, healthy, a tiny beacon of hope. When Eleanor and Arthur came to the hospital, they brought tasteful, expensive gifts. They maintained a polite, almost formal distance. They murmured appropriate sentiments over the sleeping baby, took a few photos with Clara holding Lily, and left without offering a single piece of unsolicited parenting advice or any lectures about financial planning. It was a start. Months drifted by. Our relationship with Clara's parents settled into a strange, carefully navigated equilibrium. A semblance of normalcy, perhaps, but built on clearly defined boundaries and unspoken understandings. They never apologized for the past, for the drugging, the manipulation, the years of undermining. But they stopped trying to control Clara's life. They stopped criticizing my career. The interference ceased. One crisp autumn evening, I was in my home studio, editing a powerful series of photos from a recent assignment documenting wildfire recovery efforts. Clara came in quietly, carrying Lily, who was now babbling and alert. My mother called earlier, Clara said, leaning against the doorframe. She wants us all to come for Christmas dinner this year. I looked up from my computer screen, meeting her gaze. Okay, what do you want to do? I asked. The decision had to be hers. Clara shifted Lily on her hip, considering. I think we should probably go, she replied after a moment, but with strict conditions agreed upon beforehand. She ticked them off on her fingers. We stay at a nearby hotel, not at their house. We arrive when we want, and we leave the moment we want to leave. No arguments. Her expression firmed. And absolutely no unsupervised time for them with Lily. Not yet. I nodded slowly. That sounds entirely reasonable. Manageable. Clara came further into the room and sat down in the worn armchair near my desk, bouncing Lily gently on her knee. She looked around the studio, at the prints pinned to the wall, the maps marking conflict zones and environmental projects. You know, she said softly, thoughtfully, for the longest time, I genuinely believed success meant making mom and dad happy, getting their approval, meeting their impossible expectations. She paused, looking down at our daughter's curious face, then back up at me, her eyes shining with quiet confidence. And now, a gentle smile touched her lips. Now I understand that real success is about making my own choices. Choices I can live with. Choices I can be proud of. She reached out and touched my arm. It's about standing by the people I love, unconditionally, building a life based on trust and respect, not fear or obligation. 2 weeks before Christmas, another large, glossy envelope arrived. This one addressed to me personally from Arthur's office at Sterling Advisory Group. Inside was the company's slick, expensively produced annual report. My photographs were featured prominently throughout its pages. Dramatic landscapes capturing the resilience of nature, intimate portraits telling stories of human struggle and perseverance, striking architectural shots. All work I had done on my own terms, commissioned and paid for professionally without any interference or suggestions from him. Tucked inside the front cover was a brief, handwritten note on Arthur's heavy personal stationery. Hired the best photojournalist I know for this project. Thought you'd want a copy for your portfolio. It wasn't forgiveness. It certainly wasn't reconciliation in any emotional sense. It was something else entirely. Respect, perhaps, offered in the only currency Arthur truly understood, professional acknowledgement. An admission, maybe, that I had achieved success entirely on my own terms, not his. That my little picture-taking venture had value he could no longer deny. I didn't call to thank him. There was no need. We both understood the subtext. This wasn't about establishing warmth or repairing broken bonds. It was about acknowledging the new boundaries, the shifted power dynamic, the undeniable reality of our separate, independent lives. That following spring, I finally opened my own gallery in a renovated warehouse space in downtown Denver. It was the culmination of years of hard work, risk, and dedication. At the bustling grand opening reception, Clara stood proudly beside me, Lily balanced expertly on her hip, smiling warmly at our guests. My own parents had flown in from Oregon, their faces beaming with pride. Friends, colleagues, former clients, and fellow artists filled the bright, open space, admiring the large-scale prints that lined the walls, images captured from around the globe, each telling a powerful story. Towards the end of the evening, Arthur and Eleanor made an appearance. They didn't stay long, navigating the crowded room with practiced social grace. Eleanor held Lily for a brief, carefully supervised moment, murmuring something appropriate. Arthur shook my hand firmly, looked around the gallery with an expression that seemed to convey genuine, albeit surprised, approval, nodded once. And then they left, without offering a single comment on the business plan or suggesting alternative marketing strategies. As Clara and I locked up the gallery late that night, the celebratory buzz still humming in the air, she leaned against me tiredly. "Do you think," she asked quietly, looking up at me, "do you think they've actually changed at all?" I considered her question carefully, thinking back over the past year, the confrontation, the tentative steps towards a new, fragile dynamic. "No," I said finally, honestly. "I don't believe they've fundamentally changed who they are." I paused, pulling her closer. "But I think they've finally accepted that they can't change us, that they can't control our lives anymore." I smiled down at her. "And maybe, sometimes, that has to be enough." Later, much later, we sat together on the small balcony of our own house, the house earned through my work, not given as a strategic concession. We watched the distant city lights twinkle below and the vast expanse of stars emerge in the clear Colorado night sky. Lily was asleep peacefully in her crib upstairs. A profound sense of peace settled over me, something I hadn't felt in years. I realized something then, a truth I hadn't fully articulated even to myself before. I hadn't won by beating Arthur and Eleanor at their own manipulative game. In the end, I'd won by refusing to play it at all. I had simply stood my ground, protected what mattered most: my integrity, my family, my work. I had built a life, our life, according to my own definition of success, my own values. Not through schemes or calculated revenge, but through quiet persistence, hard work, and unwavering honesty about who I was and what I stood for. And that, I realized, living well, authentically, on my own terms, with the family I loved fiercely beside me. That was the most deeply satisfying victory of all.